Hi, everyone. My name is Henry Garcia. My pronouns are he, him. The title of my presentation is Beyond Turn and Talk, Student-to-Student Discussions as a Strategy for Promoting Student Agency and Engagement. So first, I'd like to share a little bit about me. I'm a fifth grade teacher. I teach in a LAUSD elementary school in South Central LA. I'm going on my 5th year of teaching. I'm by no means an expert on the subject that I'm going to present on, but I'm just going to be referencing my experiences. I also want to point out that I'm committed to learning and unlearning for racial and economic justice. And I also am on a journey on learning more about abolitionist and ethnic studies practices. And hopefully today I'm able to make some connections to that in my own work. So the classroom practice that I want to share with you all today is on student-to-student discussion protocols. So first I want to begin by asking the question, why are student-to-student discussions important for teaching? Before I address that question, I do want to begin by addressing the LAUSD teaching and learning framework, specifically standard 3 that focuses on teacher questioning and teacher discussion techniques. So on this slide, I do have both extremes. On the left is ineffective practice, and then on the right, effective practice, again, as defined by the district. So the district defines ineffective as the teacher makes no attempt to differentiate discussion. Interactions between the teacher and the students are characterized by the teacher generating the majority of questions and most answers. In contrast, the district defines effective practice as the teacher using intentional differentiated strategies to engage all students in intellectually challenging student-to-student discussions. Teacher creates conditions for students to assume considerable responsibility for the success of the discussions. Again, these are both extremes, and there are practices that fall all across that spectrum. But I'm hoping today that with my presentation, I'm able to provide you all with resources and some strategies for, I guess, developing effective practice as it relates to this standard. Okay, so again, I'm talking about the importance of student-to-student discussions. Again, this idea of students talking to one another and constructing knowledge for themselves and for their classmates, as well as for the teacher. And that's important because it's important to talk about the relationship of schools as they relate to communities that work with predominantly Black and Brown students. So in these schools, you see that there is an obsession really with compliance and obedience. The teachers are often positioned as primary providers of knowledge, especially through lecture-dependent teaching. And this is problematic because in schools that work with predominantly students of color, there's this idea that students don't have enough to offer, or that students cannot be positioned to co-construct knowledge for themselves and for the classroom. And oftentimes in these classrooms, discussion that is based on students talking to one another is often discouraged or suppressed. And oftentimes it's mischaracterized as defiance or disengagement. So really the practice that I want to elevate, I do see it as pushing back on these practices and these narratives that are harmful to communities of color. So all of this is dependent again on the philosophy of education and learning that the teacher is bringing with them. So again, depending on all of that, student-to-student discussions have the potential to promote student agency and ownership of learning. They have the potential to position students as co-constructors of knowledge. They also have the potential to foster communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity, as well as other 21st century skills. They have the potential to develop speaking and listening skills, And again, this can be a tool that can be leveraged to establish a classroom where everybody's ideas are welcomed and seen as necessary. And again, depending on the teacher, these discussion protocols can be a way for validating the different learning styles that students bring with them to school. And it kind of, and it can be in alignment with culturally responsive practices. Again, these are all, this all lives in a potential, in the sense that this will, depending on the teacher and how the teacher carries this out, it could yield to all of these elements, but it also could not. So I'm hoping to unpack some of these ideas as I go on through the slides. Okay, so now I want to visit this question, which reads, how can student-to-student discussions be used to promote student agency? So just in terms of defining what I mean by student-to-student discussions, I'm referring to 5 to 7 minute discussion protocols that I'm encouraging folks to use throughout the day. These discussions are not tied to any particular curriculum or subject matter, so they can be used in math, in ELA, as well as other subject matters. And I do see a connection to ethnic studies in the sense that these discussion protocols really gets at the idea of how we're teaching. So I feel like oftentimes social justice and ethnic studies teaching focuses on the what, and yes, we want to center narratives where communities are resisting and fighting for justice and fighting for joy, but also how are we constructing this knowledge for our students? Are teachers only providing it via lecture, or are students being elevated to co-construct this knowledge for themselves? And this is an area where I really struggle with, because I often am very motivated to talk to young people about current events and complex ideas that relate to racial and economic justice. But I have to often remind myself that I'm being problematic if I'm just delivering a lecture and I'm telling students how to think. So I do see that student-to-student discussions have the potential to kind of push back on traditional ways of teaching and relating to students. And again, the way that we use these protocols are highly reflective of just our philosophy on education and learners. And I don't really see, yes, I teach 5th grade, and this presentation, in some ways is geared to elementary, but really this is just more about how we believe that people learn. And these strategies can be applied to elementary as well as to adults. So again, the idea behind student-to-student discussions is really about elevating student voice. It's about co-constructing knowledge alongside students. And it's also about conveying to students that they can learn from their classmates and that their classmates can learn from them. And also, it's not just about teachers looking for the right answer, but it's about teachers sharing some of the responsibility, sharing some of the power, and positioning students in a place where students can teach the content and students can also lead the learning process. And what that looks like in practice is that these discussion protocols allow students to introduce, clarify, support, reinforce, and challenge complex ideas that they're bringing to the classroom, as well as ideas that they're hearing their classmates share. And then in those conversations, in that dialogue, I think meaningful learning can happen. So when can you use these discussion protocols? You can use them throughout the day in a range of activities. They can be used to access prior knowledge. They can be used when you pose an open-ended question, after you read a text, before a whole class discussion, during guided instruction. They can be used for the purposes of scaffolding. Also, they can be used, or actually they should especially be used after direct instruction. So if you find yourself talking a lot, then that's a good place to incorporate a discussion protocol. And also the idea is to challenge ourselves as educators to work towards replacing our lectures altogether. This is, again, something where I struggle with big time. I oftentimes get carried away and want to start talking at my students, but again, meaningful learning happens when students are elevated in this position of being able to co-construct knowledge alongside teachers and classmates. All right, so the next question I want folks to think about is, what are some examples of student-to-student discussions? So I'm only going to focus on one example, and the one discussion protocol that I want to elevate is, and this is one that a lot of folks, a lot of teachers use. So inner outer circle, or it's also known as concentric circles. So again, the idea is you have two circles. There's an outer circle where the people are facing inward, and then the inner circle people are facing outward. Students should be facing one another. And depending on the purpose of the activity, students in the outer circle can pose questions or share an opinion or strategy. And then once the inner circle has had the opportunity to answer, either the outer circle or the inner circle will rotate, and the process repeats. So again, this activity can be used to get students to practice questioning and responding to one another. But more importantly, I want folks to think about how can this protocol be used in a way where students are introducing ideas, clarifying ideas for one another, supporting and reinforcing, as well as challenging complex and nuanced ideas that they're hearing, and again, positioning students to do the heavy lifting of learning for themselves and their classmates. Okay, so you did concentric circles. What happens next? So I do want to talk about this idea of going from student to student discussions to then having students lead the discussions. And then one resource that I use are just like an accountable talk anchor chart. So yes, students are generating these ideas, and they're talking to one another. But then what happens after that? And I think that it creates an opportunity for students to talk about their ideas, and then they can talk about which ideas they agree with, which ones they disagree with. If students have questions or they're confused about something, I think that these protocols create an opportunity for students to then begin to talk and answer these questions for one another. Students can also make connections as well as cite evidence. But again, I think that the discussion protocols in and of themselves are not as important as what happens next. So really the discussion protocols are a tool for then getting students kind of, warmed up for the discussion and the learning that's to follow. And again, highly, highly important that it's student-led and coming from the students as opposed to the teacher. And then, how are these discussion protocols any different than turn and talk? And I'm a big fan of turn and talk. I use it all the time, but I also want to challenge myself to expand my toolkit of techniques, if you will. So these discussion protocols are different in the sense that they have the potential to offer a range of activities, and it can make learning just more fun and engaging, especially if students are able to walk around and talk to more folks. As a teacher, you have the opportunity to observe how students are engaging with each other, and then you can revisit norms of discussion and communication. And then you could just change it up, and students are talking to not just the person that they sit next to, but just more of their classmates in general. But again, depending on the teacher's philosophy of learning, these protocols could potentially become just another version of turn and talk. And teachers can just use the protocols for the sake of using the protocols. But again, what happens after the protocols is what's more important. So if you just are doing the protocol and then you have no student-led discussion afterwards, or you're not elevating student ideas or differences in opinion, then you're not really getting at the important part, which is students co-constructing ideas for themselves and their classmates. And yeah, so these protocols again should build on turn and talk. Historically, teachers just walk around, during turn and talk, and they're micromanaging ideas or discussions, making sure students are on task and looking for the right answer. But really, I hope that with my presentation, I'm able to convey the idea that there isn't a right answer. And really, the purpose of these discussion protocols is just to be able to really investigate what students are really feeling and see what their different entry points are. And really the idea is to work with students as equal partners in their learning process and sharing the power and trusting students that they can take ownership of their own learning. And that being said, Turn and Talk can be approached with the same mindset. I continue to use Turn and Talk. But again, it's also, I think some questions to remind yourself of are who's doing most of the talking? To what extent are students oriented to one another? Oftentimes I find in my own practice that students are still oriented towards me and they're looking for me for answers, but I want to push myself and push folks to think about what would your classroom look like if students are looking for each other as the source of generating new knowledge. And our students leading discussions and constructing knowledge for themselves, their classmates, and the teacher. Again, really important questions to think about. And then again, I want to reiterate that the specific discussion protocols are not that important. I'm sure there's there's like new and innovative discussion protocols that I have yet to learn about. But the key here is, you want to foster student dialogue and student agency. Two resources that I have used are protocols for culturally responsive learning and increased student engagement, as well as Kagan cooperative learning structures. I'm sure if you do a Google search, you'll find a very expansive list of different strategies that, depending on the style of the teacher, you might want to use. But again, I don't want folks to get caught up on the specific protocols themselves, but more, I want people to think deeply about how you want to elevate student voice and trust students that they can take ownership of their learning. So with that, I just want to end with the idea that teachers should and can trust students to co-construct knowledge and share responsibility of the learning. Again, I think these protocols have the potential to elevate students to do just that, but really it just depends on the mindset of the teacher and how much trust they're willing to give their students. Okay, that wraps up my presentation. I hope that it was helpful for folks. Thank you, and I hope that you're able to expand your repertoire and toolkit. Thanks, everyone.